Welcome to Spaces Between, and I'm your host, Roy Canday, and this is a podcast about bringing gamers closer together. Today, I have a special guest, Ryan Courtney. What's going on, man?
Going great. How are you doing?
Doing awesome. So, for any of you guys that don't know out there, Ryan is the designer of Pipeline, a game I know it did like super good at Origins and Gen Con, and I'm sure you're getting super excited to see how it does at Essen as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. If it continues to do well through Essen, I think it might have legs. So we'll see. Definitely will be interesting.
But yeah, I thought that Ryan would be an awesome guest to have on, especially since my last designer guest that I had was Jerry, and he's super story based. Like Ryan, you're like all about like the math and the numbers and like economic pipe Euro sort of games. And I've played some games with you before, or I played a prototype with you at least before, and it's like, oh man, it's all about. Like I there's like that meme of Zach Galifianakis with like all the wheels spinning. I feel like that's how you play board games.
Yeah, I mean, I see the art and stuff before I sit down, but as soon as I sit down, it's just the numbers. I don't see anything else.
Gotcha. For you as like a game designer, is it hard to like enjoy the game as like just a game, or do you always think of like the design behind it, like, oh, that went there, and oh, that went there, or whatever, or oh, they made that choice to make it this way?
It really just depends. I mean, I could go in with a certain state of mind that I'm just going to go enjoy this game. Like, for instance, I bought one game this year, just one. So, a party word game, right? So maybe doesn't fit what people would think I would be playing. But yeah, I have quite a bit of fun playing that one.
Yeah, Just One's amazing. I actually played it for the first time this past week or whatever. But yeah, it's super fun. So as far as like Pipeline and things like that go, like what kind of like was your inspiration to design that kind of game?
So I was designing algorithms to like auto-generate content for these. I don't know if you've played like Flow or any of the mobile games where you're like connecting pipes and whatnot. So I was writing algorithms to do that already because I was going to try to make. Or I was working on different mobile games, and I wanted to have all that content generated for me. I didn't want to make the levels by hand, right? So I wanted to have that all done for me, and then I also needed the solver so that I could give you hints along the way or whatnot. And
that's awesome.
I had joined the NYC playtest group, which at the time had, Gil's still there, but Emerson Matsuuchi, several other people, Eric Zimmerman sometimes shows up. So a bunch of those guys were there, and I had joined that group, and I was basically giving them like paper prototypes of mobile games that I was working on.
Oh, that's awesome.
And then they were all doing board games, though Eric Zimmerman does a wide range of things. He does everything from like art games to like, all kinds of games. But most of them were doing board games, so I was like, oh, maybe I could do a board game too. So then I was like, all right, let's take this thing I'm already working on and then move it into the board game space.
Oh, that's awesome. So, like, with the algorithms and stuff like that, is it just like that you were planning like doing the programming and stuff for these mobile games, or?
Yeah. So I was writing like a generator that would make these different levels, right?
Gotcha.
So I'd handwrite this thing or whatever, and then it would spit out a level, and then
gotcha. So it's basically procedurally generated sort of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So I want infinite content, and I want to do it at like the click of my button, as opposed to me having to do it by hand, because it doesn't make sense for me to make mobile games where I have to do it each one each one by one. That takes too long, and I'm lazy. So if I could just make the computer do it for me, it's much better.
That's awesome. So what kind of information from like the programming side of that flowed into like designing games like Pipeline?
Not terribly too much. It was mostly just like I was working with that pipe connecting theme, and I was playing around with different like computational geometry problems, and it just happened to be that I was like, okay, let's see what I can do with like a domino setup of these tiles, right?
Yeah.
And it turned out that with 3 different colors, like there's 135 like permutations or whatever that are like rotationally unique. So I was like, okay, that's a reasonable number to work with. 135 tiles is maybe something I can put in a game, and then, you know, maybe it's a selling point. And then, so I started building actually multiple games using those pipe tiles. And this one is sort of the heaviest, not the heaviest one. There's one heavier than this, but this is one of the heavier ones that came out of that sort of series of stuff I was working on.
That's awesome. So, do you think like the like pre-generated stuff and things like that could be applied to board games in certain ways, like perpetually generated, or like having computer algorithms help build the stuff? I know Keyforge helps build decks and things like that. Is that sort of technology like something you'd be interested in seeing in board games, or you think could be utilized in different unique ways?
Well, yes and no. One is just that board games, you have to print them, right?
Right.
So even if I was able to spit out infinite content, like, how do I get it to you?
Oh,
right?
yeah,
I
for
could
sure.
release it as print and play, I guess, but, you know, that's a little bit of a pain.
Mm-hmm.
And so compared to like video games or apps where I could just push you an update, it's a little bit harder with the board games. That being said, I do use simulations and whatnot to test my games, most of them, or with some of the beginning design things, just to see how something will play together. But as far as procedurally generated content for the board game, I don't know if we're there yet.
Mm-hmm.
I've worked in hybrid spaces before, you know, a mixture of physical and digital, and that was a lot of fun. The company that I had done, I was like an independent game designer for them or whatever, they ended up going defunct. So I think it's a tough space to be in, and I think we've seen that with several of these companies trying to do sort of these tabletop with a digital screen mixture.
Yeah.
A lot have tried, and we haven't seen a terrible amount of success yet. I think eventually it will happen, but right now it hasn't proven itself enough. And as a designer, if you're trying to make any money, it's tough to go into a platform that doesn't have enough users to make any money as the designer. So
yeah, I'm sure there's like some interesting hurdles that would have to be like tackled to like make the whole stuff work. I know there's a decent amount of games, but I don't think they've really utilized the technology or the ability that the technology would have to like its full potential for all sorts of different stuff. I mean, you have stuff like Mansions of Madness and stuff that help you set up the board and have like cute little app puzzles and stuff like that. And I love that game and I love the story and stuff of it. But the amount of things that like full integration of like programming into different things is kind of crazy. Like all the different things that people that design really well could do, but of course I'm sure that just takes time and money, right?
Yeah, I mean, you'll see it in like the indie scene, right? So you'll see people put out in like indie or art games that they basically take to festivals and they show off. And so you'll see people trying new stuff there, but those games are not typically going out to your mass, you know, your mass public. They're just art games for the most part, or tech demos. But until like a platform proves itself, it's like a chicken and the egg problem, right? Like before the platform proves itself, it's hard to get top designers working on your platform, doing things, you know, interesting and new. Like you're mostly going to just get people who are going to be able to throw up a quick demo, right? Like, yeah. So yeah, we'll see. I mean, I would be super excited to see it. I'm definitely not one of those people who believes that technology should not be at the table. Like, I'm all for it. So if we can get hybrid things and there's money there, I'd absolutely go in and start designing in that space again.
Yeah, for sure. Do you think, like, as a designer, like if you were showing off a game that involved an app and things like that, that publishers would be more hesitant because they're like, oh my goodness, that's gonna... I mean, I'm sure there's some publishers you just couldn't even take it to because all they do is physical stuff, right?
Well, I'm already used to having my games being tough to show to publishers, right? So, like, you know, Pipeline was too heavy to show to 95% of publishers, right? So we had a few people I could show it to. So yes and no, right? So, I mean, yes, the answer to your question is yes. It will definitely be harder to show these hybrid games because then the publisher has to worry about paying a developer to do that stuff. And unless you, as the designer, I mean, you don't want to. Oftentimes, you don't want to have to do that yourself as the designer. You want to try to keep things segmented. Like different people do different work. You don't want to have to do the development too. You start taking on too much risk yourself. So, yeah, I mean, definitely, it makes it harder.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know. I think it'll be really cool to see how things come along with the future. Like, I don't know if you had a chance to try out or see the whole Tabarua thing or whatever that Simon's working with a company out of Japan for, trying to like integrate like apps with the tabletop and like the dice recognition stuff. And like the actual, I mean, I'm sure it's really difficult to put all that stuff together, but like the stuff that the app does is not crazy inconceivable. But it'll be interesting to see if something like that can even take off, I feel like one company is going to have to put a lot of work behind it to be able to make it happen. I mean, it's a lot of it's about price point, right? And how much people are going to be willing to pay for something like that.
Yeah, I suspect that a bigger company is going to have to do it. Like, Simon's big, but not. I suspect somebody like Microsoft or Google or Sony or something like that will have to do it, because they'll have to do the same thing they do with their video game consoles, where they push it out at a loss and then they make their money back in the games over time. So I don't know. We'll see. I mean, I didn't play the Simon Tabaroo or whatever.
I think they had it at Gen Con, but they just had like media people come in there and do it. It was pretty cool because it has like capacitive board, and like it would RFIDs and like the bases of the characters, and you could like move them around, and the app would recognize which room they're in. And they had like Bluetooth dice that you roll, and it would like automatically know if you hit the zombie and things like that. It's basically Zombie Side, but with that stuff. And they said they're going to try to integrate it with several of their different games. And they're going to try to open it up to other publishers and things like that. But then, of course, they'd have to be developing within their like software system to be able to play on it. They want to try to make it like a console, but it's like they have to have people actually owning the console for that to work, right? So
yeah, I mean, and there are a lot of cool things that could come out of something like that, right? So like for me personally, I can make more dynamic economies. I can make the game fit I can personalize the game to your skill level, which is something that's very, very difficult to do with the board games. So like, I essentially with Pipeline, I just picked a, target audience, and that's how hard it is. Right. And then like, if it's too hard for you, sorry. If it's trivial for you, also sorry. Like there's not terribly much that I can do. I have a small window of flexibility, but with something like a digital implementation of it, I can personalize it to you so it would fit your skill. And then there's just a bunch that you could do behind the scenes with digital games that would be, fascinating. So yeah, if it, I'm rooting for it. I'm just not certain if it's if we're going to see it super soon. So I don't know. We'll see.
And I'm sure even with those games, in certain ways, like if you have app integration, it could adjust the difficulty level of the game as the game goes along,
in-game. Yeah, in-game.
And I mean, the app could kind of act like an actual DM. Like if you're playing D&D and, oh my goodness, like the monsters are beating you up too much that no one's having fun, like a DM in D&D, or at least a good DM, can figure out a way to still make this fun and like pull that back. But like in a game, it's like, oh man, everybody's getting crushed, or everybody's having too difficult of a time. You can maybe have the game pull back a little bit, which would be kind of interesting.
You could think of things like online matchmaking, where if I have a table and you have a table, we both seeing the same thing on our own separate tables, but we're still able to play. That would be awesome.
And pair people at the same skill level and stuff like that. So
support for solo games. So solo gaming has become a pretty popular thing. And again, like what you can do with a deck of cards or whatever is not the same as what you could do. Like the AI that I could write for an app or for any digital content would be far superior. So
that would be like super interesting if somebody made a like Atama or whatever like app that just like ran the solo stuff for like a whole bunch of different games. I feel like there's a market there that like a lot of people would jump onto, like, oh man, I get this like the solo app, and it helps me run solo in like a whole bunch of different games, you know? It's like, oh, we don't have to have a dummy player. We don't have to have this or that. We just follow along with what the app says to do, sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a huge demand for solo. So, yeah, and this integration is definitely something that will make that much more reasonable. It's just, I mean, I don't want to say that like the solo games out there right now are bad. They are not as dynamic, and they don't play. Like, often when you play a game, you want it to feel like you're playing against a human, and unfortunately, most automata do not do that. Right. So
it's like I've played Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea plenty of times, and did I lose you for a second? I think you're back.
Yeah, lost me for a second there.
I've played Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea a bunch of times against like the solo stuff. It's like that game's a 4X game, and you have different opponents, and like they can come in and attack you and stuff like that. In a real match, you can be like, "Hey, man, I'm not winning. Maybe attack that person over there." When you're playing against the computer, it just jumps you no matter what. So it can be brutal, you know, or it just jumps somebody else, even though you know they're not even doing something. So it's interesting stuff. So what about the potential for like using these like apps and things? You said you used and run like simulations on your prototypes to help you with sort of like, I wouldn't necessarily call it play testing, but running the statistics on the game. Like, what does that look like for you? And
I mean, it's just numbers. It doesn't look like there's no pretty UI or anything to it. Like, it looks nothing like the game. You wouldn't even recognize it as the game. I'm just running the numbers, and then you know, it spits out whatever I need it to spit out, and then I'm like, okay, this looks like it might make sense. This looks like it won't make sense, right? So nothing pretty. It just is a bunch of numbers coming out, you know.
Do you think there's like an opportunity like in the future for like maybe like self-learning things to help play test or prototype games and things like that? Like, hey, we have this computer algorithm, it's going to learn the mechanics of the game and like play through it a bunch of times and recorrect its strategy to try to figure out if there's certain things broken in a prototype and things like that.
Yeah, so reinforcement learning is a pretty like hot nerd topic, right? So
yeah.
You know, you see like DeepMind and OpenAI and whatnot, and the problem is to do that stuff requires a professional in that area.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And a professional in that area would take all the money that you made in the game plus some. So you'd be losing money just by hiring one of these guys. It's not that we couldn't do it. And as a matter of fact, I have experience in this area. But so it's not that I couldn't do this. It's just the amount of like opportunity cost, the amount of money essentially that would be drained into this currently doesn't make sense, right? We would have to have far more users for these types of things to make sense. Even in video games right now, most of the AI is using a much simpler thing than reinforcement learning. So there are people experimenting with those things, and it will probably move more towards that direction as things are becoming easier and easier to do, you know, because it's being supported more and more, or made, you know, simpler for people who aren't experts in those areas. So I think you'll see it in video games first, and then if board games ever get to a point where they're selling enough copies, maybe you'll see it. But right now, you know, an expert in machine learning is expensive, right? So.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting, like the cases where they've taught or had machine learning learn like chess or Go or things like that, and just smash like grandmasters of the games and things like that. Or even like, I'm sure it's even way more like advanced, like League of Legends and stuff like that. It's like, oh my goodness. And then the people who play League of Legends take the strategies that the AI was using and being like, hey, that's actually a really good strategy. I never thought of that. And now like the actual players are implementing some of the things that they saw the AI do. It's like, that's just so strange and crazy the way that stuff works.
Yeah, they did it with Dota. They did it with StarCraft 2 as well. And what they did is they gave some of the pros access to these bots, and then like you said, the pros would learn from the bots and pick up new strategies
or play against it, like to try to get better and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy.
And the thing is you could sort of you could do stuff to make the bot's learning get pushed in certain directions, so you can have it sort of explore certain spaces, right? And so you could have it go into these fringe areas if you want, or push it towards those directions, and then have it then play against it or whatever, and sort of see like how to handle those types of things, or if there are ways, because as a human you're going to play X number of games, right? And even the pros who play way too many hours, they can never play, I don't remember what they were saying that a StarCraft game ran in for when they were doing the reinforcement learning, but it was a very, very short amount of time. So they just cranked through, tens of thousands or hundred thousands of games, right? So you can't really do that as a human in a month, right? As much as some of us try.
I wonder how many people that tuned into this are thinking that they were going to be having an AI machine learning conversation at the beginning.
Probably not too many.
So let's get to know a little bit more about you, Ryan. Like, what kind of games are you into, or like, how did you start gaming? I know you have like all this experience with the tech and programming stuff, but what made you drawn to board games?
So I was in grad school. I was super poor, and it's expensive where I live to go out and drink. And so this was my alternative. So I needed something to do with my girlfriend at the time. And so we bought games instead of going out and blowing like $100 to $200 for dinner and drinks. Yeah. So like in the end, this was just a cheap alternative. And then, like I said, I was working in sort of the digital space, and then I was interested in educational games. I'm still interested in educational games. I should say was. I still am interested in educational games, and how games can be used for learning in general. And so I took some courses, both at my university, but also in universities in the cities. And one of them happened to have a large board game library. And we had homework that made us play some of those games. And so that's when I started actually going to meetups. So I'd never gone to like meetups or anything like that prior to that. So it was just, there was a meetup in this board game library at Columbia University, and I started going to it because I had to.
Oh, that's crazy.
And then it sort of, the fact that I was poor and this, was another thing, like this was a cheap thing that I could do. I continued to do it, and it's, and then I got hooked on it. And then after some amount of time, I was starting to burn out on playing games. And so I started designing, sort of scratched the itch that playing had used to scratch.
That's awesome. Like, I think that's a very different story than like most people have. It's like, oh no, yeah, I was forced to play board games at school, and it just kind of stuck a little bit, and now I'm making my own.
Yeah. I mean, it was, serendipitous, I guess, or whatever. It was certainly not by choice or plan or anything like that. So yeah, I don't know, worked out, I guess.
That's awesome. So what is your like philosophy when it comes to like designing games in general? Like, what is your end goal, or like what do you try to make when you're making these games?
I pick some sort of experience that I want the player to feel or like to go through. I very rarely like take an existing game and then like try to modify it or try to borrow things from it. Of course, I've played a lot of games now, and I watch a ton. So I watch like almost every one of Tom's videos because they're super short, right? Like it's like 10 minutes, and then I'll have an overview of a game. It's much faster than me actually playing the game. So like I do build up a huge library of like knowledge about different games, but I don't go and look and be like, okay, this is a game I'm interested, or I liked, so let's make one similar. I tried that before, and I wish I could design that way because it would make it easier, and my design would be broader. But typically what happens is I'm working on something outside of board games, or I'm reading a book about something outside of board games, or I'm doing some sort of activity somewhere in my life outside of board games, and I go, okay, how do I feel when I'm doing this, or how did I feel when I'm reading this? And then I try to make a board game that is going to make you feel how I felt during those things, right? So that's what I attempt to do. And then I guess maybe what I'm more known for is I don't try to make heavy games, but I try to make every game, like, depending on its genre, a little bit harder than what's currently existing.
Gotcha.
So, like, I'll make a 30-minute long game, that's I would call it a party game, but then, I make it a little bit more challenging, and then people stop calling it a party game, but it's still 30 minutes long.
Right.
With like the same, it fits everything within the party game genre, but then it just ends up being a little bit more challenging. Gotcha. So I'm hoping that that's an audience that isn't being reached. That's still to be determined, right? I'm still pretty new.
That's awesome. Like, so you want most of your games that just add like more thought or like thinkiness into it, so it's not as like surface level when you're playing through it?
Correct. Yeah. So like one of the most fun things for me about gaming, I know people have infinite reasons why they game, right? But one of the most fun things for me, and this actually started way back in the day, and it was like, so like with Magic the Gathering, I enjoyed playing Magic the Gathering somewhat, but what I really enjoyed doing was deck building.
Right.
So I would buy these magazines back then. Like, I don't know if I had access to the internet at the time, so I'd buy these magazines, right, and it would have the list of every card that was released, right, and then I just go and sit at my house and try to build decks out of these card lists, right, and so like that is super fascinating for me. So I want my games to make you have something to think about once you leave the table. Gotcha. So if you're not thinking about my game after you've left the table, then I feel like I failed as a designer, for sure.
That's awesome. I've played so many of those games where it's like, I mean, I don't know if you consider it a heavy game. It's a decently heavy game, but I love Twilight Imperium just because it's got a lot of things going on, a lot of moving pieces, and you're trying to build up your economy, but figure out how to min-max it into getting those points. But every time after I'm done playing that game, like, I can't go to sleep at night because my brain won't turn off from thinking about, I could have done this, I should have done that, or maybe I should have gone this way and done a little bit of that, or maybe I should have gone for that objective instead of this objective, sort of thing. It's always interesting, like, when a game like grabs your brain basically and doesn't let it go afterwards because you're stuck thinking about like the exciting things that happened during that game, Yeah,
exactly. So that's the goal. Like, make them feel the experience that I felt in this thing outside of board games, and then also, provide them something that forces enough thought that you must think about it afterwards. Like, those are my main two things that I try to do.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things I thought was interesting, and you mentioned it just a second ago, is you had a tweet or whatever saying that you like watching Tom's reviews or whatever because it helps you build your catalog of like where current game design is. I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. Like, you're looking at it at a very like analytical standpoint of watching reviews. Yeah,
I mean, what other resources there are out there that cranks it out in 10 minutes like that? I mean, there are a few people who do it fast. So I guess like the Board Game Geek, he has like those 2-minute like Allegro reviews now. So I use those as well, but there aren't many. So, there are even reviewers who like maybe more of the style games that I prefer, but they take too long. Like, for me, right? It works for their audience. It makes sense for their audience. But as a designer, I don't have time to put in hours into every single game to understand how it works. Like, I need it in very, very short clips so that I can be like, okay, these are the main things that they're doing. Like, what's the interesting mechanism, and what are they trying? Like, why is this going to appeal to whoever they're trying to make it appeal to, and then move on to the next one. I just don't have time to to invest much more than that 10-minute thing. So
do you ever like catalog different mechanisms, or be like, oh, they did this trick there, did that sort of thing there, and be like, that's interesting, or stew on certain things you see in games?
Yes and no. I mean, my brain never stops. So like that's like a benefit and like, a demon at the same time, right? So it just, means I don't sleep at night, but at the same time, I'm constantly churning stuff. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say, like I said before, I wouldn't say that I go and like I say I took this from this game, right. But I think I have everything like washed up in this big like soup of this huge library, and I'm like, okay, I've seen something in this area, but instead of just seeing one thing in this area, I've seen like 25 things in this area because I've seen so many videos and I've tried so many games, and so. Like what I see is like that blend of the thing. I may not even be able to tell you which game it came from, right? Like I just know like this is like an area, like this foggy area here. Like there's something cool in this like this little subsection. Maybe I could put that into what I'm currently doing.
That's kind of interesting because like such a like interesting way to look at it. Like, hey, here's this piece of code, and I'll put it in the program of the whole game itself, and then try to run it to see if it fails, sort of thing, almost.
Yeah, I mean, when I design, I also don't make the whole thing. Like, I make things like modular. So gotcha. I will, and this is part of like my be lazy like philosophy, is that like, for instance, this pipe mechanism. I made like 4 games out of it, right? And so some of them will get published, some of them will not. But, I tried different things with each mechanism, and then I'll combine them together for my heavier games. And then for the games that are lighter, I'll try to, make them stand on their own, right? And so each thing is tested independently before it's interwoven together.
Gotcha. That's interesting. So I guess it's a spoiler that you haven't seen the last of Ryan's pipes yet.
Yeah. Hopefully not. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome, man. So I know you've been like super excited about how well Pipeline's been received and stuff. Like, how exciting was it to see it like on like Hotnesses and like Geek Lists and all that stuff like that?
Yeah, I've gotten super lucky with Pipeline for sure. There's no doubt about it. I think we released it at a good time. So you're obviously good friends with Emerson. Like Plan B does the same thing with some of his games where they release at Origins. There's less games to get released there, and so that you can get a good amount of excitement. Like, so that was one thing. We made some decisions with Pipeline. So like I said, there's a heavier version of Pipeline, and we cut it, or I cut it. I said, like, this is too heavy to release. And so I cut it, and then we released this version. And I think that decision allowed Pipeline to reach a much broader audience.
Yeah.
Because how we released the other one, I think we're in like the very few, maybe 1,000 copies sold range, right? So we're doing much better than that. So yeah, I mean, a lot of things went my way. We have, I basically said I wanted Ian O'Toole to do the art for this, and we got him, and I'm a nobody, right? But Ian O'Toole's well known, so we get him on there, and people are like, oh, Ian O'Toole did this thing, it looks cool, so that brought interest in. Like, nobody knows who I am. I mean, nobody knew who I am, and nobody still knows who I am. So, like,
hey, well, that's why you're on Spaces Between, because now you can talk and figure out all your programming AI stuff. No, I'm just kidding.
So picking up an artist like that was very important to me. Like, that was part of me getting in with Capstone. It's just like, I want Ian O'Toole to do the art for this. Like, he's gonna make a huge difference. And so getting somebody like him was big. And then there's just a bunch of weird random things that happen. Like, a guy who ended up being like the developer for the game I met randomly online. And like I just bumped into random people who ended up having like substantial impact on marketing or promoting or whatever it may be, so a lot of being fortunate. It could go either way, like this could have been a complete flop too, but it just happened to be that like enough, random good things happened that it seems to be doing well.
That's awesome though that like you were excited about like a specific artist and stuff like that, because I know a lot of people that are very heavy on the mechanics and stuff like that aren't as concerned about how a game looks and things like that. But I mean, for me, I feel like aesthetics play, since I'm such a thematic board gamer and I like story and stuff in my games, that like the way a game looks on a table is really important. And like even just like, oh, check out these cool pipes and things that turn around, stuff like that. I feel like just the aesthetics of a game like make a big deal and can help sell a game for sure.
For sure. And like I said, I'm nobody and he was somebody. And so now we had somebody's name on it. Like his name's just as big as mine on the box. His should probably be bigger, right? Like he sold more copies of the game than I did for sure. So like, massive, absolutely essential. And I will say that one thing with this particular game, I was designing it so that you would have something, like in my mind, I wanted you to have something that you would be proud of when you were finished, which that pipe network is always sprawling. It looks unique every single time. And I wanted that to pop, and I needed an artist to do that so that you would be proud. And at the end of your game, you would take a picture of it and you'd throw it onto Instagram, you'd throw it onto Twitter. And it turns out that people are taking a lot of pictures of Pipeline, and that means, and like that was the goal, right? So like, if I wanted people to take these pictures, I needed a top artist. And so that was a big push for me, was, to do that. Because again, like it's not like I am a marketing genius or anything. And it's not like I have a million contacts that I can do this by myself. I need a sort of grassroots type thing.
Oh yeah.
So if I can get people to be like, oh, I made this cool network afterwards. It's made out of these pretty pipes done by Tool, photo, Instagram. Like that's just promotion for me, right?
That's awesome. Like I never thought about like how photogenic is your game. Like if your game is like people want to take more pictures of it when they're done, people want to like share that with their friends online, like that's only just good for your game. So it's like, hey, make sure your board game looks good and like people can take awesome photos of it when they're done, so that way they'll share it with their friends and more people be excited to play it after that. I
think you see that more with your thematic games. I think you see it more with like the more filler games. So you see like Bosk and Photosynthesis, like they look great. And then
you don't see tons of people taking pictures of the like 18xx games that like the black and white map with a few stocks off to the side. But they could, I mean, you could make an 18xx game that's like, holy smokes, look at those train routes I built, But I mean, that's not necessarily the market they're going for. But
what's the price point you'd have to put that game at, right?
Right.
Because, an 18xx might sell 500,000 copies or whatever it may be. It starts getting prohibitively expensive to do those types of things. So, yeah, I mean, that's one nice thing with like these big thematic games is they, like Simon knows it's going to push out X number of copies, and so they could make it fancy.
Yeah.
Some of the heavier Euros, you have to be a little bit more conservative about what you throw into it, just because you need to keep the price point from getting too absurd. But I definitely think that there are a lot of people in the heavy game space that don't think about their aesthetics, and that hurts them, right?
Yeah.
So like Barrage, I know it's had like its issues, right? But like the promise of Barrage is that, like it has this really cool board and it has like this wheel and stuff. And had they successfully gone through those things, like they were on the right path, right?
Right.
And like Teotihuacan, like again, it's got those nice chunky tiles.
Yeah.
Like it's pulling people into these games. Like at this point, how many games came out at Gen Con? 1,000 something, right? Like you have to really do a lot to get your game to, be in the top. And the thing is, if you're not in the top, your game just dies.
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
It just dies. So you have to differentiate yourself, and you can hope that you're such a good game designer that that's enough, but that's stupid.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's so many good games out there. You can't play all the good games. There's so many great games. Nobody can play all the great games out there. So you have to find a way to make your great game also be the great game that people are actually going to invest in, and looking good and being something that's exciting to play, not only from the mechanics are solid and you're doing all the different stuff, but also aesthetically and the experience and the feeling that the game gives you while you play it too, just helps it stand apart. And that's kind of what you got to do this day and age, find a way to stand apart and make it be the game that people want to put in their bag or put in their shopping cart, And
it's definitely richer, right? I mean, if you if you're in the top, 5 games, top 10 games or whatever, then that is going to allow you to potentially stay in that area longer. And unfortunately, you could be just outside of that, and your game may be even better than some of the games in the top, whatever. But if it didn't get that initial push or that initial traction, unfortunately, people don't have time to really go back and find these ones that didn't quite make it.
Yeah,
it seems like
it's interesting because you got it. People sometimes you just get that star power name. I mean, I know Eric. I've hung out with him plenty of times, but it's if Eric Lang makes a game and Eric Lang's name is on a box, people look at that game sight unseen, oh, it's got his name. Or even Emerson now, people are oh my goodness, Emerson's game, let's check out Emerson's new game, but it's when you're first starting out as a new designer, or maybe you've had several games but you haven't had that big mega hit yet. You don't have your Century or your Blood Rage or whatever game it might be out there yet. Then it's kind of oh man, you gotta strike the gold, and then it's oh, now your name really means something, But I'm sure it's like that in basically any industry you're in where you're trying to produce something and sell it off and get people excited about it.
Yeah, but there's a lot of big name designers who still, or designers who put out really top quality games who don't when they put something else out, it's not an insta buy.
Right.
Like Alan Moon, he put out a bunch of Ticket to Rides, and he has enough of those to live quite comfortably, right? But he's tried to put out other stuff, right? And it wasn't just instant, picked up by a publisher and pushed out. Or Martin Wallace, right? He put out Brass, and Brass is a top 20 game on BGG or whatever. It's super high up there, but again, he's had games that have that aren't just insta buys for people. So I think some people who have a very strong brand, particularly somebody like Eric Lang, you're getting this super tricked out, full of minis, and his games are fairly similar in how in the experience that you think that you're probably going to get out of them. Right. So Blood Rage and Rising Sun aren't the same. And actually, so this will be a little bit funny for you guys, but Chaos in the Old World is one of the first games that I played.
Oh yeah, nice.
And I actually
were you forced to play it by your teachers?
I own that game. So I own that game. So I actually started when I started playing board games. I played all hybrid Euro Ameritrash style games. So,
I feel that's my favorite genre, is where you get to manage resources and then crush people with those resources. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. So I mean, I have that. I have Dominant Species. Let's see, what else did I have? We played Blood Rage a lot at the beginning. We played a lot of these hybrid games. We played Eclipse. What are the other big hybrid games? And then I do get pulled into some games that aren't necessarily my cup of tea. But when I first started, I was not into somebody tried to make me play Agricola when I first started, and I was like, this is the most boring thing ever, right? So I think it's always funny when people get snobby about this is better than that or whatever.
Yeah.
That's just stupid. play what you want to play, and
Yeah.
you know, it doesn't make you better or worse for playing one thing or or another, and it doesn't make you smarter either. Like sometimes people get all snobby about like math stuff being smarter or like story stuff being, you know, more creative or whatever it may be. Just play what you want to play is so goofy. Like,
And let's all play it together, you know?
yeah. So
So what do you think, if you started with a lot of those games, are you still going to try to design games in all sorts of different genres and spheres? Or are you going to stick more with your making games heavier? Or what do you think is like your end goal or your passion towards this?
So I definitely want to do stuff in a wide range.
Gotcha.
But I do want to try to keep some level of a brand, and that
Gotcha.
brand is, like I mentioned earlier, to try to make games that are a little bit more thinky, a little bit more challenging for whatever genre they're in. I'm not certain that miniature games is a space that I would, you know, excel at.
Yeah.
But if I came up with an idea that I thought would work for that, I have no like resistance to doing such things. Like, as a matter of fact, I think that would be pretty cool. I just don't have currently on the table a miniatures game that, you know, that's sort of, you know, growing in my head or whatever. But I have stuff that I call party games, all the way up to stuff that I consider heavy games, and what I consider, you know, like super heavy.
If
is
Ryan considers it a heavy game,
yeah, like
then
some
you
of those
know.
some of those you may just have to throw away, right? Like some of them just are unpublishable,
Yeah.
right? Particularly at the heavy end, like some of them you're just like, okay, like I'm sure that 250 people plus my mom's going to buy this. You know, like, is it worth going through the effort? Yeah, maybe not. I would love to design more lightweight games and more party games. It's tough for me. I will say that designing in not only is that a super saturated like market, so it's really hard to stand out, but it's a very difficult space for me to design in. But I am very interested in doing so.
Yeah.
I also really like word games, and I really like team games. So hopefully we'll see stuff. Like I have ideas for those things. I have prototypes for those. Hopefully we'll see those types of things come out. Word games are a little bit harder to get published, and team games are super hard to get published.
Oh, crazy.
So
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, it seems like people would be like all over that sort of stuff. I mean, especially since like Codenames has done so good, and then I know just won the Spiel des Jahres. So it's like I wonder if like more and more people get into the hobby and there's more people coming on board, I wonder if people are skewing towards lighter games, because normally Spiel des Jahres used to be more like the family weight Euro games and things like that, like Catan and stuff like that would win Spiel des Jahres, but now it's like leaning more and more towards like the party category. So I wonder if like most people or like the large majority of people are leaning more towards those sort of games.
So from what I've heard, the German market is actually getting a little bit lighter. And
Gotcha, that's interesting.
The Americans are actually starting to like want a little bit heftier games, and again, so like we have our heavy games, but like a lot of our heavy games require like a huge time commitment.
Oh yeah, for
right?
sure.
And so like I don't have time to play all the heavy games. Like I don't play 18xx. It's not because I don't think that 18xx would be fascinating. I just don't have time to play it, right? And so I think that I'm hoping that there's a space for like these challenging games that are in a more reasonable time frame. I don't ever plan on making anything that says longer than 2 hours on the box.
Gotcha.
And I would like to keep things in between 15 minutes to about 2 hours on the box. Like anything over that, it just doesn't make sense. So like where I live, you know, probably where everybody lives, like, you know, you have business professionals, and they don't have time to do over 2 hours. Like our heavy game meetup is at Columbia on a Monday night, which means we need to go there and we need to play our one game and go home, and that game can't be too long. right? And so, I kind of think of that's sort of like the group that I think of. Like I think of like the engineers and the scientists and whatnot. The quantitative people typically are the ones who prefer my games, and I think of that person and like think about how much time do they typically have, and the answer is usually not too much. Maybe they have a couple hours on a weekday that they're allowed to play a game. So
I'm definitely super interested in like the ways that mechanics and different things that can be utilized to like lower downtime for players and just have people more involved in like playing the game and then just speeding up the game overall. Like I'm a huge fan of like simultaneous actions and doing things simultaneously and working together, not real time where you're not chaotically slamming stuff around, but still like thinking out your turn and doing it at the same time as other people is super intriguing to me. And I wish more games had that sort of stuff going on where like you can play the same amount of game as you would normally play if you took a turn, then you took a turn, then you took a turn, then you took a turn, but we're all like just engaged with the game more. I don't know.
Yeah, I have 2 pipeline games that are simultaneous play. So I know that there are people out there struggling with AP on the big pipeline. I see the reviews, I see them come in, but I do have. So I have one that's like a 1 to 8 player game, and I consider it like a filler party game type thing, and it's simultaneous play. It takes about 20 minutes to play. So I definitely don't want to get like pigeonholed into like I only make heavy games.
Gotcha.
But most people will probably consider most of what I make thinky.
Gotcha. Yeah, I wonder like if like the brand thing, is it like should you always like try to stick to like a certain brand? I know you've got like a game or so out, so it's not like you have like a huge catalog that certain people have a brand, but it's like I wonder if like you should break that thing early, like, oh, he makes this kind of game and that kind of game. Because if you make like a whole bunch of like, if you made a whole bunch of Pipeline-ish games, it would be like, oh, he makes games like Pipeline. So
yeah, I mean, you see people do well in both directions, right? So like Eric Lang has a brand, Uwe Rosenberg has a brand, right? Like,
but then sometimes people will make a game outside of that brand, and then people are like, oh, this is not what I was expecting at all, and just get thrown off because you might make a game for different people than you normally would make a game for, but your same people are buying your game, so then they're thrown off,
And you can tell people all you want, and they just don't listen to you. You could be like, look, like you may have liked my previous game, but this one is really not going to fit. Like, well, you designed it, you're the same guy. It's like, well, it's not the case. Like, it really depends. Like, Emerson tries to do quite a broad range as well.
Yeah.
And so, like, for him, like maintaining a brand is a little bit harder, right? Because he did the Century games, but then he also did Hidden Movement.
Yeah, he had Spectre's Op, and that's where that was the first game of his that I loved was Spectre Ops. And then he did Century. I still really enjoyed that too. And then he started doing more stuff with Plan B, which was along the Century line. But now he's going on the opposite end.
Metal Gear.
And doing Metal Gear, which is very story driven and back more towards like Spectre Ops. So it's definitely super interesting.
And he's got a bunch of stuff in prototype that I obviously can't talk about, but he does a wide variety of stuff, and so for him, like, how does he keep the people excited about his Century Plan B stuff? How does he keep them excited about his stuff without because they don't necessarily want to play Metal Gear, and the Metal Gear people maybe don't want to play Century. So there's some challenges there. But on the other hand, you get to work on a lot more different types of projects, right? And depending on how your mind works, like, you may not work in such a pigeonholed, like I do X really well, and that's all I do, right? So it really depends. Like, you have to, as a designer, like, you do need to find a way to stay motivated. And so just doing stuff to sell games or, just to fit a brand or whatever can be dangerous. And that's why, like, I don't want to get put into like only doing heavy games. I think I would get tired of that, so.
Yeah, and I bet you there's like a refreshing effect that comes with like I've worked on these kind of games, and I'm going to work on something completely different because I'm sure like designers just like everybody else it's distracted by like, oh, look at this thing or that thing, or if they have a certain thing they're passionate about. Like I know with Emerson, Metal Gear's the thing he's really super passionate about.
Yeah.
And I mean, you worked on like tons of different pipe things, and I'm sure you see things and you're like, oh man, I'd love to like create a thing like that or like around that sort of thing. And I'm sure like designing through passions is like a great way to design and can help you keep the flame up for actually getting it finished,
Yeah, I mean, so like if I'm reading on some sort of topic, right, and I'm like, okay, this is a cool topic, so I read a couple books on it, and then I want to make a game on it. That does, not every single topic I do fits a heavy game, right? Like I read some books on like essentially corruption in Wall Street, right? I could make a heavy game about it, but like the corruption and like whatnot, it sort of calls for a little bit more of a little bit more randomness, right? And so, throwing a ton of randomness in a super long game may not work as well as it would work in a smaller game. And so, and there's like collusion and essentially like cheating things. And so, it works for a different style of game.
Right.
So yeah, getting put into a situation where you can only do one style, I think would be pretty tough for me at least. But again, if that's the thing that you're super, like if you're Stefan Feld and you know how to make point salads like crazy, like like just do it. Like if that's what you like to do, then go for it. Or and then you've got crazy people like Reiner Knizia, he's published
all over the wall.
5,000 games. Who knows what the actual number is, but it's humongous, right? He does everything. So
he's got that algorithm just making games.
It's incredible how much output he has. That's just insane. Or like Vlaada Chvátil.
And his games, a lot of his games feel very different too, which is pretty cool.
He goes from like teeny party games to like Mage Knight.
Yeah.
And then like through the ages, like one of the better like card driven Civ games out there. Like where do all these come? Like these are all vastly different, right? So for me, that's a little bit more interesting way to design. But then trying to have a loose brand that holds my stuff together so that people can be like, okay.
I like the idea of having like a breadth of design. Like, hey, I can create this thing and then this thing over here and then that thing over there. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, it looks like we're coming up around our time. I just want to give you a chance to like, if there's anything that you have coming up or anything you like people to keep their eye on, to shout out. Just let the people know what you're working on.
So, like I mentioned, I have a game that's sort of Wall Street based. It's a stock game, and then I have additional pipeline stuff coming out. So I have pipeline expansion. I'm trying to push out the heavier pipeline, but we don't know. Like I don't know if that's terribly possible. That may just be like we do some sort of like collector's edition. It's going to be priced ridiculously high, and then like I said, 200 people will buy it, and then we'll just move on. But then I have these lighter pipelines. So for people who were interested in the pipeline pipe laying tile, but they didn't want to play the full game, or they don't have time for those, time for that type of stuff, I have much more, or I have two more smaller ones coming out. So I have a 2-player one that would be like Patchwork-esque, and then I have one that is, like I said, 1 to 8 players, super quick, simultaneous play, 20 minutes. So yeah, I'm pretty excited about those things. And then I have, like 10 other projects, but I won't talk about those at the moment.
Ryan, you're going to brand yourself as like the pipe guy. And when you put out a game that doesn't have pipes in it, they're going to be like, what is this? You're going to have a word game where all the words are like spelled out with pipes. And then like all of your games have to have pipes in them somehow. It's already been branded. You can't go back now.
I hope not, but it'll probably happen. Who knows?
Awesome. And if anybody wants to like reach out to you, like say, hey, what if there was a publisher out there, or like somebody who wants to reach out to you to ask you any questions, like how would be the best way to contact you?
I'm on Twitter at RCC Games, and I'm also on Instagram at the same handle. So RCC Games on Twitter is probably the best way to reach me. Yep.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show. It's definitely been a lot of fun, and it was cool getting to pick your brain. I wanted to go even deeper with all the AI stuff, but I'm like, I feel like we're probably losing people because I think that stuff's fun, though. Awesome, man. Well, thanks so much for coming.
Yep, thanks for having me on.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks so much for watching another Dice Tower video. If you enjoy our videos, subscribe to the channel for more fun, comprehensive board game coverage. Also, consider joining us at one of our events. Come to Dice Tower Retreat, a small, intimate gathering where gaming is king. Join us for Dice Tower Cruise, the largest board game cruise. Attend Dice Tower West in Las Vegas for gaming fun on the West Coast, or Dice Tower East in Orlando in sunny Florida. Dice Tower Conventions, the friendliest gaming conventions on Earth. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower.